Our involvement with the cults started out with the fact that our daughter became very interested in them in the Unification Church, the Moody, so to speak, in high school, as a matter of fact, and became good friends with a professor whose children had become involved. I don't know quite how they did get started, but they saw a great deal of my daughter visited them a great deal during high school years, and upon graduating in high school and going into college, went almost immediately into the Moonies, or the Unification Church, on a full-time basis. Now this was back in the mid-70s. There wasn't too much known about the cults in general at that time. They were just beginning to sort of come to light, that there were a group of what people had called alternate religions, that of which the Unification Church that was founded by a Korean named Sun Myung Moon had started to, what we felt, take advantage of the lives of young people. Our daughter was in effect recruited, I would even say captured, non-violently, not violently at all, but through persuasion, through love bombing, and so forth, to become a full member of this organization, and to spend her next year and a half out on the streets of America, essentially begging for money for the Unification Church. We finally did get her out of this by having her talk to some other young people her age who had already left the Unification Church and were pretty good at explaining why they left it. And that seemed to resonate with our daughter, who, if we'd never met these particular kids, she might still be in it. We don't know. But the bottom line is that we ultimately, shall we say, in today's terms, it would be called kidnapping. And in those days, you might have just called it rescuing. We did get her out, and in the course of getting her out, through, as I say, the information that these other people her age were able to give her, we came in contact with Dr. George Swope, who was a minister, a Baptist minister, Northern Baptist, who had set up you might say a refuge that was especially designed for kids that had just come out of these cults, and there were many other organizations that had many similarities with the Unification Church, and he'd set up in a farmhouse up in New Hampshire I'll call it a second place that they could rest up and talk to kids that came from a lot of different organizations just like this, and learned the many similarities that there were between these, the way that they recruited youngsters and tried to take advantage of them and keep them in there for the rest of their lives. This was a very successful operation that he had, and through it, our daughter gradually came to get back into what we would consider normal life, and at this time got married, has family, and looks back on her experience, not entirely negatively, but grateful that we had managed to get her out. Now, George Swope was a really wonderful person, and he and his wife had, through their love and affection for these kids, formed many bonds with them, and they actually had a few either volunteers or paid persons that worked as aids to help in introducing literature and different news items about what was happening in the world, and particularly what was happening in the area of the cults, which were getting to be now rather notorious. And sort of spurred on by the fact that a representative of Congress, Leo Ryan, had been in effect murdered in visiting a cult in Guyana. It was a complicated story, but leaving with a negative opinion, the whole outfit was collapsing down there, and they tried to take as many members down as they could by self-poisoning, and his congressional committee just happened to be visiting there at the time, and they didn't want them to get out. And so he was murdered actually at the airport when he was trying to leave the country. It was in November of 1978, and probably spurred on by one of his associates who did escape and was an assistant of some sort in Congress, managed to stimulate a hearing by Senator Dole on this whole issue, which was getting to be more and more controversial as time went on, highlighted by the escape, or I should say his narrow escape, but the murder of Leo Ryan. And Senator Dole set up some hearings in Congress in February, I believe it was, of 1979. And this got a good deal of national publicity and interest. Our daughter was out by that time, but we continued our relationship with the Swopes, and in fact we're in Washington at the time these hearings took place, and we helped suggest various persons that could be interviewed by the committee to relate their experiences and give further background to the hearings that he was conducting. Later that year, and I believe it was in the summer of 1979, George invited us up to a picnic at his farm, or farmhouse I'd say, up in New Hampshire. And he had invited to this a number of us that he knew through the work that he'd done in his secondary refuge house, you might call it. The reason he got us all together was that he had also had come in contact with a lawyer in the Boston area who was a lobbyist, and had briefed him on what lobbying actually is, what you can do as a lobbyist, what your limitations are, and so forth. And he wanted us to hear this lobbyist and his views on how maybe we could be more effective, or we could become effective, I'll put it that way, in spreading our experiences, the knowledge of our experiences, and what we felt were the improper, and I'll have to say evil, aspects of many of these cults. So we met on this nice summer day and had a very interesting presentation by the lobbyist, and he indicated that he would be willing to lobby for us in a totally legal manner to help define legislation that could be of use in handling this problem. Now, of course, it's a very controversial issue because freedom of religion is a very important aspect of our life in the United States, and anything that would smack of a religious bent and the incursion on that religious bent would be looked upon with great suspicion and controversy by our citizens. So here we're dealing with an organization that we know is conducting many illegal practices, yet presents itself as religion, gathers people not necessarily by a violent means or kidnapping, but more in terms of persuasion and loving persuasion, so to speak. So it's bound to be looked at. If you were against such an organization, were you now against some sort of religion? Were you now trying to prevent young people of legal age from practicing the religion that they wanted to practice? So we took the information that we got from this lobbyist who said he would be in a position, since he was a registered lobbyist, to be able to present our information to lawmakers that might be considering some sort of legal justification for limiting the actions of these cults. Those conversations continued over a while after that meeting that we had with George, and we did suggest going ahead, and I think, if my memory serves correctly, collected a little money amongst ourselves to support a few trips by this lobbyist from Boston area to go down to Washington and explore the situation with the various other members of Congress that might be interested in this whole problem and what could be done about it. We knew that some of these cults, in addition to doing, you might say, kidnapping our children with friendly persuasion, were probably also, however, acting improperly or illegally in their financial matters. And so there was probably more to this than just the straight personal aspect that we've been involved in. We started at that point, as I say, with some private contributions to get this lawyer going, and then decided on George's recommendation that we ought to put together a little organization that could solicit funds and could publish a periodical that could employ the lobbyist and other activities that we might get involved in. And I remember sitting there, and he looked over at me and he said, "You're the guy that could run this." I said, "Oh no, not me, I'm still working. I don't have time to do it." He said, "Oh no, you know, the mail will come in, you just take the checks and deposit them," and so forth. George was quite a guy that could convince you in almost anything. So I agreed to become the president of this organization. He agreed to serve on the board of directors. One of the other couples that we'd met at this meeting had a son that was a high-level person in the Unification Church, and yet they felt honestly opposed to the kind of activity he was in, and this was Ed Snee, and he agreed to serve on the board. And I can't think of Adler's first name. Can you think of it?
Was it David?
David Adler, who was had been in the Moonies for a short period of time, and was the son of a publisher down in the Washington, D.C. area, and involved in publications himself, also agreed to be on the board. And George said, "Don't worry, you don't have much to do. Just collect some money here and we'll get this lobbying work done." Well, that was the beginning of what we ultimately decided to call the American Family Foundation. And we decided that we should put out a periodical that we called at that time the Advisor. Now, the purpose of the organization, one of whose activities would of course be to support any lobbying that would be appropriate, was really to be able to make information available. And that's what we decided information. We were not out to try to get anybody out of the cults. We were not out to deprogram anybody, as the popular term called it at that time. We were out to provide information to local police, local lawmakers, local local church people, pastors of churches, of synagogues, of organizations that on a personal basis might have contact with young people that had gotten involved in some way with what we all call cults. And so our total purpose was providing truthful information. This was not going to be editorial material. It would be factual. We would try to report experiences of people that had been members of these organizations. We would probably publish information for those who were opposed to our even looking into the subject. But at any rate, the idea was to get information out that would be useful to lawmakers and to law people as well as other religious organizations, and to provide also a basis for speakers that could go to basically high schools, because that's the level of the youth that should really be apprised of some of these problems. As a matter of fact, at that time, I and my wife started going to various high schools where we found that they were interested in having us make a presentation. Our daughter had gotten out of the cult and that she'd been involved in, and accompanied us on some of these, but mainly we just presented our own personal experience and tried to present it in what I'd call a unbiased and informal manner that would display through our experiences what these problems were. I don't think we even realized at that point that Moon had managed to become virtually a billionaire, certainly a millionaire of a high degree, owning properties or going out to own properties, and was out to buy newspapers, important newspapers. Even he bought an important newspaper down in Washington, D.C. He set up bought the Spanish-speaking paper in New York City. He founded, or at least bought, papers in South America, Uruguay, I remember. I don't remember all of them, but he also moved in on the fishing industry up in Gloucester and established an outpost up there. And we managed to get some of the newspaper people in Gloucester to investigate this. So our purpose was not working toward getting any particular individual out of the cult, but rather to try to prevent them from going in by giving them the information and the questions that they ought to ask, and by informing the press wherever we could. I neglected to mention the press is a very important thing, and we managed to get a number of reporters in various newspapers that were interested in covering this. Some of them didn't take our point of view, but that's the way it is. We wanted to present factual information, they had to deal with it. Similarly, we managed to get spots on TV programs in discussion groups. And Channel 7 here in the Boston area presented a very, very interesting program that presented both sides of the issue in one program, and it served as a model for trying to get others done. we proceeded in that manner. So we, as an independent organization, and still are, I myself was president for a number of years, and then ultimately resigned. I turned it over to one of the women that had been very much tied up in cult matters, Daphne Green, who became the next president, and from there on the organization developed, period.
How and why did you link up with Jack Clark and his little group?
Oh, okay. During our lobbying activities and the fact that we were approaching law people, press people, law enforcers, as well as law generators, you might say, we had some brush, you might say, with the medical community. Now, at that time, the work of Lifton had been published, examining various aspects of mind control, I'll put it that way, to simplify the subject. And we were interested in seeing what else was being done. That was a very pioneering work, and others had followed in that. One of the most prominent ones was Dr. Jack Clark at Harvard University. And we had come in contact with him because another one of our associates, Gene, can't think of the name, was living not too far from Jack Clark in Lincoln, Massachusetts, and whereas Jack lived right across the line in Weston. And so we met him. I've forgotten exactly how we met him. We went to one of his lectures probably, and came up with the idea that some, I'll call it, that medical studies that were based on irrefutable material, evidence, experiences, what have you, particularly in the area of psychology, would be a useful adjunct and a part of the American Family Foundation. And so we decided to meet with Jack and discuss this possibility, because he was certainly a well-known name in and had done a great deal of work in studying the mind effects that were involved in the cult recruiting and the various cult practices, and had done this in a thoroughly scientific manner, not based on lots of hearsay or evidence that was not really conclusive, but on the facts as he was able to measure them as a scientist. And so we met with him in his home in Weston, sort of out of the blue in a way with him, and discussed the possibility that the work he'd been doing, which was primarily at Harvard, could be melded into a part of the American Family Foundation. And after some discussions of that nature, he agreed and brought over two of his lead workers, Bob Schecter and Mike Langoni, both of advanced degrees and who had been working with him on various projects, some of which I guess were related to this whole area. And they were very, very helpful in being able to bring, again, material into things that we could publish or we could talk about or refer to published documents that lawmakers could use, that anybody that really had a fundamental interest in this whole area could look and read and find out material that was based on facts. That turned out to be a very, very good combination, and in a sense has continued to this day.
Did you have philosophical objections to linking up, let's say, with the Cult Awareness Network that were more than just organizational? They had a membership group. AFF was a charitable organization without membership. Over the issue, let's say, of deprogramming versus what came to be called exit counseling. Was that an issue then?
Well, we had participated, I would say, mainly as audience to in some of their meetings. Now, the Cult Awareness Network was founded out in Chicago, and and we got to know the people quite well. Most of them, if not all of them, had negative cult experiences. We did. Their view was a more aggressive view in the sense of aiding deprogrammers or using deprogrammers. I really don't know a whole lot about their inner workings. Our, let's say, our relationship with them was strictly an informal relationship, mainly built on personal relationships. There was no organizational relationship to them. And of course, we were very happy that we didn't, because they were an organization that was taken over by the Church of Scientology, much to everybody's chagrin. And the Church of Scientology gained a huge mailing list, but we never did merge our information with theirs. So, and although they were wonderful people and were doing an interesting job, the emphasis on actual deprogramming, we stayed away from, because I don't think we really liked the name deprogramming, but B, we preferred, as I say, more informal means. Go ahead.
Did cultic groups ever threaten you and your family over what you were doing?
Well, let me say, I think we imagined they would more than they actually did. When we got into the actually setting up well, first of all, when I and my wife names got personally hoisted up the flagpole, you might say, it was when we actually kidnapped our daughter from the Unification Church. And it was, by any legal standards today, a kidnapping. We just up and hired a private detective and picked her up and carried her out of New York City and carried her away to some remote place where she could sit and talk to some former members of the Unification Church and become convinced that she shouldn't stay. So after that, I think we probably imagined more threats than there actually took place, but we were very concerned. We got an unlisted telephone number and intended to isolate ourselves. In this connection, of course, though, we did get on the law books. An experience of that nature is this. While our daughter was still up in the rehabilitation center, you might call, that was run by George Swope, Dr. George Swope, I came home, and my wife was up there supporting her. I came home one day and saw a strange car parked in my driveway. So I just kept driving on around the block thinking, well, what should I do? It was well known that we had kidnapped our daughter. We had other connections of a personal nature that could report to us what Unification Church thought about us and what they might try to do. It turned out, after I'd gone around the block a couple of times and thought this over, I decided to go and park next to this car, find out who was in it, and it turned out to be a member of the Lexington Police Force. And they had put out an alarm for my arrest. So I said, look, let's talk about this thing a moment. And we sat in the car and I told him the whole situation. And we talked for about an hour. And I said, now, I'm not telling you where my daughter is, but she's recovering and it will take another few weeks. But what I will do is to have her come and visit you all at the police station. Come what may, that'll be it. And I told my daughter about this. I said, you know, now here's your chance to put us in jail if you want to. But I said, we'll make her available. Well, 2 weeks passed, we made her available. She came down and we asked, we weren't there of course, but we asked afterwards how she felt about the interview. She said, well, they talked about, if I could paraphrase this, they talked about 5 minutes about what my actual situation was, but they spent about an hour fascinated with the subject of cults, what it was all about. So it was really a worthwhile type of thing. But as far as an actual threat, I would say we hadn't received one. We just felt we might, and so we isolated ourselves.
What do you think of the organization, the International Cultic Studies Association, as a result of what you began, the evolution?
I think it's wonderful. I think that Mike Langoni and his associates and Bob, who's been doing a lot of their publications, done a wonderful job. And it's directed in just what we'd like to see. In other words, the dissemination of information by setting up seminars in various countries. And of course, it became recognized fairly early in this whole game of AFF and its follow-on organization that the United States wasn't the only country that was involved here. There was quite a lot happening in Europe. We came in contact, of course, with people in various countries. And what has been carried on by this association is a much broader range of spreading the information than we could have accomplished on our small AFF type of operation. So I think that a wonderful job has been done by not only expanding the organization here in the United States and making available very, very fundamentally good publications of the results of the seminars, as well as guidebooks that are based, again, on fact, they're based on actual experience, they're based on, and certainly take a totally legal approach to and view of what has been said. I think it's just been a wonderful expansion of that. And so now, just looking at the publications, of course, I'm no longer involved with the organization other than being a financial supporter. The breadth of the subject material, the breadth of the countries that they've covered, I think is just wonderful. It's just everything that we could have hoped for, and we're glad to see that it happened. It got picked up and moved right along.
Thank you, Kay. This is a wonderful, wonderful interview. I know everyone's going to be very, very interested and enthused hearing it.
Well, thank you, Bob.